This is meant to be advice more catered towards novel writers, but I think there are some fundamental principles which can be reapplied to any sort of storytelling medium, be it visual or otherwise. Some of my thoughts on this topic are inspired by a video from Mother's Basement that he made a few years ago and that I internalized and still remember to this day. Jeff Thu, professional shitbag, talks at length about what makes a good anime fight scene and has made several videos on the matter that you should check out, because I happen to agree with a lot of what he's said on it. However, before I get into the fundamental principles that will work for making any fight scene compelling, I'm first going to focus on the one piece of advice I can give to anyone writing in a novel format. Keep it simple, stupid. Yes, we all believe that fighting should be something flashy and entertaining to envision. The visual media we engage with has taught us that flair and glamour make a good fight scene. We must see every punch, kick, and headbutt that goes into the scene. Otherwise, we do not properly experience it as the viewers. However, when it comes to novel writing, what we want to do is the exact opposite. Nothing is more powerful than the reader's imagination, and the more you get in the way of the reader's imagination, the more your fight scene is going to suck. If you're describing in very great detail every move and reaction of a fight in your novel, you're bogging down the pacing of your writing. And frankly, it's boring. Less is more in this case, and finding the most concise way to describe your fight is what's most important. Get out of the reader's way whenever you can, and only give the details which truly matter for envisioning the fight. Now that the simple advice is out of the way, I'm going to move on to the other fundamentals. Another reason you might absolutely suck at writing fight scenes is because you're too focused on writing the fight scene, and not at all focused on writing why they are fighting in the first place. A fight that does not need to happen is also a fight that no one wants to see or read about. Fight scenes, at their core, come from a conflict, or in some cases a union, of motivations. A clashing of wills, thoughts, and beliefs. Two people who are fighting will almost always have a reason for doing so. And while enjoying the thrill of the fight is a motivation, it is also a very standard and somewhat weak motivation. Fight scenes can come as a result of obstacles for your character. They can also be used to display a philosophical conflict between two or more characters. The fight should represent more than who wins and loses. It should represent the characters who are participating. Additionally, you might suck at writing fight scenes because you yourself don't know the first thing about fighting. If you want to learn how to write fight scenes better, then you should do your proper research. No, don't go out into the streets and punch the first person you see. Although, if you do, go for the weakest looking guy and at least you'll win. Jokes aside, like anything else in writing, you should do your research. Watch combat sports like MMA or boxing. Look at interviews with people who fight for a living. Take a few boxing classes, or heck, pick up a fighting game. Understand the mentality and tactics of a fighter. And this is what brings me to my next point. The next reason you suck at writing fight scenes is because you don't use tactics in your fight. You don't understand the flow and rhythm of a fight. Critics of turn-based RPGs will often point to the fact that people are taking turns during combat and say, that's not realistic. Nobody would just wait for the person to fight or move or dodge or do whatever. But if you actually have been in a fight or have studied fighting for any extended period of time and really thought about it, people do take turns in fighting. People will read their opponents or make actions or reactions depending on what their opponent does. Two people throwing hands in any sort of professional manner are not just thinking of how to harm their opponent, but also how to protect themselves. They're thinking about how to get their opponent to drop their guard, or when to react to a strike, or when to exploit a flaw in their defenses. fighting should be a back and forth, both physically and mentally, when you're writing it. If you have ever played a fighting game competitively, the principle is the same. People who compete at high levels in fighting games will often read their opponents and set up traps for them to fall into. They will practice combinations and techniques repeatedly until it becomes second nature for them to pull out whenever it's useful. The reason people practice techniques until it becomes muscle memory is not just because it makes you a better fighter, but it frees up your mental space to think of other things while you're fighting. You should convey that in your writing, and your scenes will become even more compelling with that inner monologue. Think about the characters who are fighting. Sometimes it helps to break down their fighting style into a set of basic moves and strategies that they will always try to implement against their opponent. Maybe one fighter really loves keeping range with their kicks, while another likes to close the distance and grapple, or sit in the pocket and brawl. Think about how you can convey a character's personality and beliefs through the way they choose to fight. Are they honorable? Do they allow their opponents to get up after knocking them down? Or do they stomp them while they're on the ground, taking advantage of every opportunity they can to win? Do they throw sand in their opponent's eyes? Do they bait their opponents into aggressive rushes, only to return with heavy counters? Do not worry about making a fight look realistic, but do worry about making the tactics of a fight realistic. Learn why fighters will use certain techniques, and think of ways you can do that for yourself in your own world. Ultimately, a good fight is one which releases the tension of a story. It is the confrontation and the ultimate release of all the things you have been building up to that point. So, do your due diligence as a writer and don't skip that part. Make sure characters have something to fight for in the first place, and the rest will come easy. But the greatest fight to win for any writer is the blank page that sits before you. So find your fighting spirit to continue and start writing.